Boldwood presents The Sleepover, written by Keri Beevis and read by Imogen Church. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Prologue. When she looked back to the summer it happened, it hadn't been all bad. There were 6 of them that year, the Americans having moved to the village after Christmas. Generally, they were a tight-knit group and seldom let anyone else into their circle, but curiosity had been piqued by the different accents and cool clothes, and barriers had dropped. And for the first time, they had allowed a boy into their fold. The country had been gripped by a heatwave, and when school finally finished for the summer holidays, they made the most of it, meeting up early in the mornings, keen to show their new friends around. Lazy days were spent cycling along country lanes, playing games of hide-and-seek, climbing straw bales, and daring each other to ignore the danger, keep out notice and venture onto the train track. When it became too hot, they went swimming in the river to cool off and made future plans over lazy picnics of crisps, melted chocolate bars, and warm cans of Coke. The days were hot, but the nights were unbearable, and open windows had been a necessity. Heads had tossed and turned, finding no cold side to the pillow, and legs had dangled out of sheets, the need to escape the sticky heat overriding any fears of monsters under the bed. It had been a blessed relief when they were allowed the occasional outdoor sleepovers. They were entering their teenage years and had excitedly talked about crushes while spooking each other with urban legends, before falling asleep under a clear sky of stars, the only sounds coming from the intermittent hooting of an owl and the chugging of the last train as it passed through the edge of the village on its way from Marks Tey to Sudbury. The memories were vivid and should have been innocent, and she guessed they mostly were. Before the monster. Before her. Everything had changed that summer, and in the aftermath, the last years of childhood had been robbed as they were forced under a media spotlight, now members of the newly coined Hixton Five, unable to escape what had happened, and having to relive the horrors again and again. The monster had said that as they were children, no one would believe them. But she had been wrong. The adults had listened, and they had believed. And the monster had been taken away. That was 20 years ago. When she allowed herself to think back to the sound of the lid closing, the darkness suffocating, that sharp and sweaty scent of fear, it was overwhelming and all too real. So she tried not to remember. It was easier that way. She had built a good life, and she tried to replace the bad memories with happy ones. For a long time, it had worked. But now, try as she might to leave the past behind her, the events of that summer were starting to plague her dreams again, even creeping into her everyday thoughts. Because the monster had been freed, and she couldn't help but worry that a storm was brewing. Chapter 1. As she stood on the beach watching the 3 dogs tussle over a frisbee, Hannah Cole reminded herself that moving to the North Norfolk coast was the best decision she had ever made. Sometimes it was easy to forget that. Yes, it was an hour's drive from Norwich, where she had been living before, and the flat she had inherited after her beloved Nan passed came with its share of problems. It was in the attic of an old 4-story building that had leaks and drafts and dodgy plumbing, and a lift that groaned loudly when working, which wasn't often. But the trade-off was the flat's location in the port town of Wells next the sea. The flat was in a cosy back street, but just a 5-minute walk to the quayside, and if she craned her head far enough out of her bedroom window, she could see the crabber and angling vessels moored in the harbour, and the creeks cutting a winding path through the salt marsh beyond. Early each day, before the holiday makers descended, she headed away from the bustle of the quayside, down the mile-long path that led to the beach. It was like entering a different world, especially when the tide was out, as it was this morning, and with miles of unspoilt golden sand before her, the crash of the waves in the distance, her mood always lifted. The dogs loved it as much as she did, and when they had tired of playing with the frisbee, she would take them into the pine woods that served as a backdrop to the prettily painted beach huts before returning them to their homes. Her Pawsome Pet Services was something she had started up earlier in the year, keen to cut back on her copywriting commitments and find a job she really loved. She got to work with animals, and it was also more active, getting her out from behind her desk. Rufus, Cookie, and Spot. They were her regular charges, and she took them out most weekdays. The 3 of them were the best of friends, despite differing in looks and personality. Rufus, the giant black poodle, towered over Cookie the Tibetan terrier and scruffy little mongrel Spot. Rufus was the youngster, big and bouncy with boundless energy but gentle, too. Cookie was highly strung but also a diva, the pretty little princess who didn't like to get her feet wet, while Spot was the most laid back, taking everything in his stride. Hannah watched them as they played, enjoying the early morning warmth of the September sun, the sky an almost cloudless deep blue. She whistled to the dogs, rewarding Cookie and Spot, who came running immediately, with a dog biscuit each from the stash she kept in her bag. Rufus was always the stubborn one, initially ignoring her as he charged along the water's edge with the frisbee in his mouth. He soon came bounding over when he realised he was missing out on treats. As Hannah clipped on their leads and headed into the woods, the curtain of trees blocked out the sun, the temperature becoming cooler. This was one of her favourite parts of the walk, as she drew in the scent of the pine cones, the crunch of twigs underfoot, overriding the thrash of the waves. She often had the woods to herself at this time of the morning, though never felt unsafe, the dogs alerting her if they heard anyone coming. Out here was a good place to be alone with her thoughts and make decisions. And right now, she needed to figure out what she was going to do about her mother and stepfather's silver wedding anniversary party. In 2 weeks' time, she would have to return home to the sleepy village of Hixton in Suffolk, where she had grown up. As it was for a special occasion, her mother wanted her to stay for the weekend, while Hannah had plans to drive home after the party. It had been a bone of contention the last few times they spoke, and Hannah was beginning to realise that unless she could find a compromise, she might have to give in. She had left Hixton when she was 19, glad to put the place with all its bad memories behind her, and she avoided returning home for visits unless it was necessary. She never stayed the night, not even at Christmas, preferring to make the 2-hour drive home. But on this occasion, her mother was putting her foot down. The idea made her queasy. Hannah was still searching for a solution when her pocket started vibrating, the sound reverberating through the woods. She reached for her phone, frowning when she saw the face of her best friend Rosie on the screen. It wasn't yet 8 a.m. Rosie was never awake before 8 a.m. "Hey, you're up early."
"Hannah,"
Rosie's voice was a panicked whisper.
"I need you to come and get me."
"Why, where are you?"
"There's this guy, and I'm at his house. We're in the middle of nowhere. I want to go home."
Hannah's heart started thudding. "What do you mean, there's a guy? What happened? Did he force you to go against your will? Where's your car?"
"It's back in the city. Please, Hannah, you have to help me before he wakes up."
"I'll call the police."
No, don't call them."
"Has he hurt you?"
"Just come and get me, please. I'll explain when you get here."
Hannah clicked onto Rosie's Snapchat locator. "You're in Bordswell?" She knew the village. It was about 20 miles from Wells. "I'm out with the dogs. It's going to take me a while to drop them off and get to where you are." She waited for Rosie to respond, but there was just silence. "Rosie?" Still nothing. "Rosie!"
"What? Yes, I'm here. I thought he had woken up."
"Rosie, if you're in danger, I need to call the police."
"No police. Promise me, Hannah."
Rosie sounded on the verge of tears, and Hannah's gut twisted, wondering what the hell kind of trouble she was in. "Okay, I won't call them. I'll be as quick as I can."
"Just hurry, okay? Message me when you get here and I'll sneak out."
All 3 dogs were looking at Hannah as the call ended, and she hurried them homewards, grateful that they belonged to neighbours who were on her route. Normally she would stop to chat, but Rosie's call had spooked her. Who the hell was she with, and what had happened to her? Wondering how wise an idea it was to show up at this man's house alone, she called her ex-husband on the way to Bordswell. She could hear the exasperation in Josh's voice the moment Rosie's name was mentioned. "You know this is going to be another case of cry wolf, don't you, Han?" She sounded really upset. "Of course she did. She plays you like a fiddle every time." There had never been any love lost between Rosie and Josh, even though they were 2 of the closest people in Hannah's life. Josh thought Rosie was a drama queen, while Rosie couldn't understand why Hannah kept him around.
"X should mean X, as in good riddance," she had said on more than one occasion.
Truth was, Hannah and Josh worked better as friends than as husband and wife. Their marriage had been short-lived, over when they were still in their mid-20s, and it wasn't until they were divorced that they really started to understand one another. Hannah still loved him, but she wasn't in love with him, and this last 8 years as friends, Josh Cole had become more like the brother she had never had. He might have had his doubts about Rosie's emergency, but he still insisted Hannah call him when she arrived at the address. As she pulled off the road and into the driveway of the house that she had nearly missed due to the high hedgerows of the narrow, twisting country lane, she was glad he had. Part of her wondered, as she tapped his name into her phone, whether she should be ignoring Rosie's wishes and calling the police anyway. "Are you there yet?" "I've just arrived." Josh, this place is in the middle of nowhere. What if she really is in trouble? Then call the police. I can't. She made me promise I wouldn't. There was silence on the line, and then she heard him sigh. I think you have your answer. If Rosie was really in trouble, she wouldn't stop you calling them. In fact, she would have called them herself instead of dragging you out there. Hannah wanted to stick up for her friend, but deep down she knew Josh had a point. She agreed she would call him back again once she knew Rosie was okay. And promise me you won't get out of the car. Hannah bit down the urge to tell him he was an idiot for thinking she would even consider it. Honestly, though, it was comforting to know he had her back. Instead, she assured him she would stay in the car, then ended the call before firing a quick message to Rosie. I'm here. She decided it was safest to leave the engine running and tapped her fingers nervously on the steering wheel, eyes on the house watching for Rosie. The walls had been rendered in a creamy yellow. It looked well maintained, and to the side of the property was a black BMW. Nice house, nice car, but really it meant nothing. Bad people could own nice things. She glanced at her phone, saw her message had been read, but there was still no sign of her friend. Rosie had said she would be waiting for her to make contact. So where the hell was she? Chapter 2. A couple more minutes passed, and Hannah was on the verge of calling the police when Rosie finally appeared. She was dressed in a tight-fitting black dress, one that barely covered her ass and showed off her slender legs, and her dark hair was pulled back in a messy knot, a typical Rosie party outfit. Hannah wound the window down. Are you okay? She had expected Rosie to be distressed, but she didn't appear concerned. The only sign of her anxiety came after she carefully shut the door behind her. It had barely closed when it swung open again, and a tall, chiselled man stepped out wearing just a pair of joggers and a confused frown on his face as he followed her to the car. Rosie, are you leaving? Rosie glanced at Hannah, shooting her a panicked look that warned her to play along, and Hannah's hackles rose as her friend turned back to the man and reached up for a kiss. That distracted him momentarily, but his attention was soon on Hannah. Who's this? This is my friend, Hannah. Hannah, meet Doug. Hannah couldn't bring herself to speak. Instead, she nodded curtly. Hi. Doug still looked confused, understandably so. How did you know Rosie was here? I forgot. Hannah has a thing we have to go to, Rosie answered quickly before Hannah could tell him the truth. A thing? As he glanced between the pair of them, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He seemed pleasant enough, but Hannah could hear the edge in his tone. Yeah. But... So, it was lovely meeting you, and thank you for last night, but we need to go. I was going to make you breakfast. We can do that another time. Call me. Rosie was already hurrying around the car and climbing into the passenger seat. You never gave me your number. The door slammed shut, cutting off the end of Doug's sentence. Seriously? Rosie? Hannah hissed as she wound her window up. I thought you were in danger. Go! I'll explain on the way back. Josh had warned her, but Hannah hadn't listened. She slammed the gear stick into reverse, knowing she only had herself to blame. You're mad at me, Rosie said as Hannah backed out of the drive. Doug was standing on the front step watching them, a frown now on his face. "I thought you were in trouble. I nearly called the police."
"I never said I was in trouble. You assumed I was."
"Are you surprised? You let me think you were. I thought it was an emergency."
"Well, it was."
Rosie's tone was turning petulant.
"I didn't want to be there. I should never have gone home with him."
"So why did you?" Hannah asked, exasperated.
"Last night it seemed like a good idea. But then I woke up in his bed this morning and I panicked. You know what I'm like when I've had a few drinks. My judgment goes out of the window and I can't help myself."
"Maybe you should give the alcohol a break then."
"Crikey! Hannah, you're not my mother."
"I'm not trying to be." Hannah bit her tongue, resisting the urge to point out that she had just come and picked Rosie up at her insistence. Exactly the sort of thing a mother would do.
"Well, can you stop laying into me, please? My head is pounding."
"Serves you right." She didn't say the words aloud, knowing what Rosie was like when she was in one of these moods. There would be no rationalising with her. Her friend could be the sweetest, kindest, and most thoughtful person, but she also had a self-destruct button. Not good when there were a lot of people out there willing to take advantage of her. She didn't even bother to ask where Rosie had met Doug or why she was out drinking heavily on a Sunday night. It was a regular occurrence with Rosie, and the bars in Norwich were a home away from home for her. The only thing that ever differed were the men she hooked up with. "Are you working today?" she asked instead, assuming she was taking Rosie back to Norwich. She used the word working loosely. As an only child who had lost both parents, Rosie didn't want for money. Her father had invested wisely, while her grandmother, who had died a few years later, had been stinking rich. The money Rosie had inherited had left her more than comfortable. Still, she liked to keep herself busy, and it was hard to keep up with her schedule as the jobs she did weren't regular. Her resume listed her first and foremost as an actress, though most of the projects she had worked on had never been released. Of the ones that had, she had played a dead body, had a cameo role in Hollyoaks, plus a couple of one-line parts in low-budget films. Then there was the modelling, and her YouTube channel, which was probably her biggest success. She endorsed beauty products, tested out the latest fads, and preached a healthy lifestyle to her subscribers that Hannah knew she didn't follow herself. Rosie was good at persuading people. She had the gift of the gab when it came to getting companies to send her freebies, and her bubbly personality shone through, ensuring she came across as likeable to her many followers. She also knew how to work the circuit, flitting back and forth between Norfolk and London, getting to know every other Z-list celebrity, blogger and vlogger out there, as well as a few big hitters. Her life was a world away from Hannah's, and Hannah had zero interest in the parties and events Rosie tried to lure her to. On paper, the two women were opposites, but their childhood ties were strong, and Hannah was one of the very few people Rosie could be her true self with.
"Nothing in the diary, thank God. Do you fancy grabbing an early lunch? We could try that new burger place that's opened and maybe go for a facial afterwards."
"Sorry, I have work to do."
Rosie pouted. "You're no fun."
"You're welcome to come over. The job I'm working on shouldn't take too long to finish."
"I think I'm just going to slob around my flat, order in junk food and watch movies," Rosie decided. "And I am never drinking again."
"Of course not," Hannah agreed, dryly. It was only Monday, but there was no waiting for the weekend for Rosie, and they both knew she would open a bottle of wine early evening and that she would probably end up heading out again into Norwich to one of the bars. She couldn't seem to help herself. And, once Rosie was drunk, her guard lowered and she made herself vulnerable. She had no pause button when it came to alcohol and drugs. Doug had seemed like an okay guy, but one day Rosie was going to go home with the wrong person. That scared Hannah half to death, and she tried again to persuade Rosie to stay with her. "You can slob at mine, have a bath or a nap, make yourself feel human again. Then, when I've finished, we can order takeout and have a catch-up." Rosie mulled the idea over, a slight frown on her pretty face, and Hannah thought she was going to say no.
"I guess that would be nice. You'll need to lend me some slob-out clothes."
"Of course." As Hannah turned the car around and headed back towards the coast, her phone started ringing. Rosie rolled her eyes as Josh's name flashed up on the dashboard. What does he want? Damn it, Hannah had promised to call him back. He was worried about you.
You told him? Seriously, Hannah. What you do, and definitely what I do, it's none of his business.
You're too harsh on him. He's a good guy, and he cares.
Guess you'd better answer it then, Rosie huffed.
I'll call him back, Hannah said, as the phone cut to voicemail. If she took the call now, it would have to be on loudspeaker, and she didn't want Rosie and Josh to start sniping at each other. Rosie was a little subdued the rest of the drive home, giving mostly monosyllabic answers, and Hannah suspected she was still stewing over the call to Josh, though she looked pale, so maybe her hangover had really kicked in. After they arrived back at Hannah's building, she marched ahead, going straight for the lift. It's not working, Hannah informed her. That was met with a sigh.
Again? I don't know why you insist on keeping this place. You know it's probably worth a fortune because of the location. You could move back to Norwich and buy something newer and at least twice the size. You'd probably have money left over, too.
Yes, okay, she could, and it was something she had briefly considered, but the location was important. Hannah loved living in Wells, and she would never be able to afford anywhere else here, even if she got top whack for her flat. I like it here, she said simply, following Rosie up the stairs.
I'm sure you'd like it somewhere else too, if you stopped being so stubborn.
This place has its charms.
Of course it does. Like the quirky broken lift and the temperamental heating.
Rosie kicked off her heels as they reached the top landing, scooping them up in one hand while she used the other to rub at the ball of her foot.
I can't wait to have a bath. My feet are killing me.
She frowned. The hot water is working, right? She was facing the stairs, so hadn't spotted the man outside Hannah's front door. Having heard their voices, he had turned to watch them, a faintly amused expression on his face as they approached. Hannah's spine stiffened as she pushed past Rosie, her keys ready. She didn't know him, and he didn't look like he was delivering anything. He had no reason to be here, unless he had the wrong address. Can I help you? You're Hannah Cole, right? Used to be Hannah Fremont? Her spine stiffened. He knew her maiden name. Something she wanted to leave firmly in the past. What do you want? The man smiled. She suspected he was trying to put her at ease, to let her know he meant no trouble. Unfortunately, it had the opposite effect. She knew that smile too well. My name's Liam Quinn. I'm hoping you can spare me 15 minutes.
Why? If he was taken aback by her coolness, he wasn't letting on. She was aware of Rosie moving to stand beside her, knew from her silence that she was equally wary. Quinn rocked back on his heels, studying them both.
I'm a writer, and I'd really like to talk to you about a book I'm working on.
He waited a beat, staring directly at Hannah, and when he finally dropped his bombshell, she realized too late, her mouth dropping open in shock, that it had been to gauge her reaction.
It's about Eileen Wickham.
Chapter 3.
They had deserved it. When it all became too much, Eileen tried to remember that. At times, it was difficult. The press had painted her as a monster. The judge had called her remorseless, cruel, and evil, stipulating that she would serve her full sentence, and her fellow inmates at HMP Nicholl had viewed her with disgust from the start. Eileen Wickham, or Eileen Wicked, if you took notice of the headlines, had quickly understood that she wouldn't change popular opinion. The press had seen to that. So she had kept her head down, tried her best to stay out of trouble, and served her time. People had already made up their mind about her, so there was little point in trying to sway them. And did she really care what they thought anyway? She had no regrets about the things she had done, and had enjoyed scaring the hell out of those spoilt and entitled kids. They had no idea how lucky they were, and it had done them good to get a taste of the dark side. She only wished she hadn't been caught. Those little bitches had a lot to answer for. Because of them, she had lost everything. The need for atonement, for revenge, had burned bright and strong, but she had swallowed it down, tried to be the model prisoner, and by the time her release came around, she understood it was all about playing a game, about telling those in charge what they wanted to hear. She had been anxious, and her belly jittery with nerves the day she was released, unsure of what might be waiting for her on the outside. But Bill had taken care of everything. Her boy had been there the day she was released, taking her to the house he was renting for them. She was on license and would have to regularly meet with a probation officer, but finally, after 20 years, the freedom she had craved was hers. Unfortunately, she quickly learnt that it came with a price. It had taken less than 48 hours for word to spread around her neighbourhood and for people to realise who she was, and they weren't happy. And then there were the journalists wanting her side of the story. Well, they could just fuck off. She remembered how they had ganged up on her before, and she had nothing to say to any of them now. Bill saw them off, every last one of them. The threats, though, they weren't so easy to dismiss. The first warning was graffiti on the front door. The second had been delivered on a brick through the front window. She wasn't welcome here, and she should leave before things became worse. Eileen had grown up in foster care and had endured her fair share of bullying and abuse. But she wasn't as tough as she used to be. She was a 63-year-old woman and no match for the group of men who tried to intimidate her as she was making her way to the corner shop to buy cigarettes. Bill was furious, but although she gave him a description of the men, he wasn't able to track them down. He tried his best to take care of her, but Eileen became afraid to leave the house, and that wasn't good when her boy worked away during the week. Admitting to weakness and living in fear was tough for her to handle. From humble beginnings, she had worked her way up to top dog, and then it had been stolen from her. Bitterness and rage warred with self-pity as she mourned the woman she had been and loathed the one she had become. She couldn't live like this, and something had to give. When Bill finally witnessed her explode one weekend, he realized it too. Before he returned to work the following week, he made her a promise. "I have a plan. I'm going to fix this. Just give me a few days." And so she waited. Chapter 4. Hannah told him he was a vulture. That was a new name for the list. Liam Quinn had been called callous, intrusive, overly persistent, and an insensitive bastard before, but never a vulture. He had also never had a door slammed shut in his face quite as quickly as when Hannah Cole had told him to get lost. He was obviously losing his touch. Which was why he was up early the following morning and had parked his car a short distance down the road from her block of flats, waiting for her to make an appearance. He wasn't callous or a vulture, at least he didn't think he was, and he tried not to be too intrusive. An insensitive bastard? Okay, maybe, on occasion, but he was working on that. Persistent, though? Yeah, that was him spot on, and Hannah was about to find out just how persistent he could be. She hadn't been quite as he had imagined. Yes, she was blonde, like in the picture on her website, and, of course, her face was the same, but the woman he had encountered yesterday had a tougher exterior and frown lines that had deepened when he had told her who he was. And what the online image hadn't captured was just how startling her wide green eyes were when you were caught in their gaze. He suspected she didn't suffer fools easily and wasn't going to be quite the pushover he had hoped. One bonus was she hadn't been alone. Liam had recognised Rosie Emerson immediately and had for a moment thought his job was going to be easy with the pair of them in one place. 2 birds, 1 stone and all that. Of course, that had been before the vulture calling and the door slamming. He got it, of course he did, and perhaps in hindsight, given what they had been through, showing up on Hannah's doorstep hadn't been the smartest move. This wasn't his first non-fiction book, and he should have known better. Hannah and Rosie had been scarred by experiences no 13-year-old should have to face. And now here he was, some bloke wanting to dredge it all up for a book he was writing. It was understandable they were going to be wary. They thought he was doing it to make money out of their tragedy. And, okay, yes, he had bills to pay, but it wasn't the only reason. He had been wanting to tell this story for a long time, and the need to do so was personal. Not that he would ever reveal that to Hannah Cole or Rosie Emerson, at least not until it was time. While he waited for Hannah to appear, he filled his belly with a breakfast bap and coffee purchased from one of the local cafes, ignoring the doleful eyes of his passenger, Tank, who was going to leave a puddle of drool all over the seat if he didn't put his tongue away. In the past, Liam would have been tempted to buy Tank a bap of his own, but during his last checkup, the vet had warned that the dog was overweight and told Liam he needed to stop overfeeding him. Easier said than done when you had 93 pounds of slobbering fur trying to guilt you into sharing every mouthful of food, just like he was doing right now. Tank had already eaten breakfast, but seemed to have forgotten that, and the staring was now being accompanied by lip-licking and agitated whining, guilting Liam into feeding him the last piece of sausage. He was too bloody soft for his own good where his dog was concerned. Breakfast polished off, Liam was just about to get out of the car to find a bin to dispose of the rubbish when the main door to the flats opened and Hannah emerged, her hair tied back in a ponytail and her eyes hidden behind a pair of oversized sunglasses. Tossing the cardboard cup and breakfast bap wrapper into the back of the car, he turned to Tank. "Okay, you're up, pal. I need you to be your most charming self." Liam had studied Hannah's Pawsome Pet Services website, where she spoke about her love of animals, especially dogs, so he was certain she would soon fall for Tank. Part Bernese mountain dog, part poodle, he was an oversized teddy bear. What was not to love? Hannah had already disappeared round the corner, but he had seen the direction she had gone and he clipped on Tank's lead, coaxing him from the car. This was the tricky bit. The giant bundle of fur would have happily stayed on stakeout all day if he had his way, letting out what sounded like a reluctant huff as he plonked his arse down on the pavement. "Come on, mate. We need to go." By the time he had persuaded Tank to get up, Hannah had a considerable lead, but the seaside town was small. She couldn't have gone far without a car. Or so he thought. Minutes later, Liam found himself on the quayside with no idea where she was. He glanced around for her. Ahead was the harbour, dotted with colourful fishing boats, and beyond that was the salt marsh, the sun highlighting the glittering paths of the creeks that wound from the quay down to the sea. The main quayside road stretched in both directions, lined with gift shops and restaurants, and although it was early morning, it was still alive with the bustle of activity from those getting ready for another day of trade. It was a beautiful morning, the sky a cloudless blue, and it was going to be another warm day, likely to bring with it a last flurry of tourists wanting to make the most of the end-of-season weather. A handful of side streets led off the road, and Hannah could have disappeared up any one of them. As Liam cursed under his breath, the dog gave him a bored look as if to say, "Ready to call it a day?" Breakfast baps and stakeouts Tank was all for. Walking and exercise, not so much. "It's your fault we lost her. Now we're going to have to find out where she went." Tank's response to that was to squat down on the pavement and go to the toilet. "Nice," Liam muttered, glad he had remembered to bring poo bags. As he cleared up the offending mess and deposited it in a nearby bin, Hannah appeared again from one of the side roads, this time accompanied by a pretty little black and white terrier. "Now you're interested," he commented as Tank's head shot up. This time, Liam had no trouble getting the dog to his feet as they followed after Hannah, keeping a safe distance away. Here on the quayside was not the place to have a confrontation, and remembering how she had been the previous day, Liam had no doubt their next encounter would be heated. He planned on getting Hannah to talk, but knew it wasn't going to be easy. He soon learnt they were heading down to the sea, though it seemed she had other charges to pick up en route. By the time they were on the beach road, she had 3 of them in tow, the terrier joined by a black poodle and a scruffy little dog. Her love for animals was how Liam planned to try and break her. Tank was big and stubborn and lazy, but he was also a handsome son of a bitch. When Hannah met him, then when she realised how much Liam adored him, he hoped she might start to thaw. The beach was some distance from the quayside, and Tank was tiring as they approached the tiny roundabout leading to the car park and toilets, whining and sulking to let Liam know he'd had enough. It took a mix of intrigue at the dogs in front, Liam encouraging and tugging on his lead, plus sheer willpower to get him up the pathway and down onto the sand. The tide was out, the beach stretching for miles, and spotting the other 3 dogs in the distance, off the lead and playing near the sea, Tank suddenly found a new lease of life. He almost dragged Liam along behind him as he raced across to join them. That was the point at which Hannah spotted them, pushing her sunglasses up on her head, her green eyes widening at the beast lumbering towards her, then narrowing again, a scowl settling on her face when she recognised his owner. "Are you following me?" she demanded, as Liam somehow managed to put the brakes on Tank. "Just walking my dog. But fancy running into you here." Looked more like he was walking you, and, yes, what a coincidence. Her tone was ice. "Are those 3 all your dogs?" Of course he knew they weren't, but he needed a conversation opener that didn't cut straight to Eileen. For a moment, he didn't think she was going to answer him, as she turned her back on him and whistled to the poodle, who was getting a little over-enthusiastic in his playtime and upsetting the terrier. "Rufus, no." She had better command over him than Liam had over Tank, as the dog backed off immediately. Meanwhile, his own dog was getting petulant and threatening to pull his arm out of its socket. "No," Hannah repeated, this time to Liam, her tone less friendly than when she was telling Rufus off. "Look, I don't mean to be a bitch, but I have no interest in talking to you or having anything to do with your book, so can you just bugger off and leave me alone, please?" Her arms were folded and her expression stony. Liam gave her what he hoped was his most charming smile. "Of course. As I said, I'm just here walking my dog." He had expected this reaction, so wasn't disappointed. Time for Tank to work his magic and win her over, he decided, unclipping the dog's lead. And that was when all hell broke loose. Chapter 5. If she wasn't so angry, it might have been comical. The giant ball of fur bounding across the beach with the current source of Hannah's irritation hot on his tail, yelling at him to stop. Of course, the dog didn't take a blind bit of notice. It had been obvious who was in charge in that relationship the moment she had laid eyes on the pair of them. The dog, Tank, she learnt from the yelling, was heading straight for the sea, making a beeline for Rufus, Cookie and Spot, which wasn't particularly a problem. All three were well socialised, and Tank might be the size of his namesake and disobedient too, but he didn't appear to be vicious. Despite his size, he was still a youngster and probably just wanted to play. Still, she edged towards the water, wanting to be close by in case she had judged it wrong. Delighted to see the newcomer, Rufus and Spot ran in circles around him, while Cookie kept her distance. Unfortunately, it seemed she was the one Tank was keenest to meet, and seeing Liam Quinn hopelessly chasing and failing to catch his dog, Hannah sped up her pace. "It's okay, sweetheart," she coaxed, stepping into the foray and reaching for the terrier. As she lifted her out of Tank's reach, Quinn managed to clip the lead on his collar. "Sorry," he apologised, turning to scold Tank. "I didn't realise he would take off like that." "He needs training." "Sorry?" "You're telling him off, but it's not his fault." "You've lost me." "There are no bad dogs, just bad owners. You need to take him to training classes if you can't control him." "I see." From the faint smirk on his face, he didn't see or care what she meant at all. "I'll bear that in mind." "Of course you will." Hannah kept her thoughts to herself, not wanting to get into an argument, not wanting to get into anything with Liam Quinn that would give him an excuse to keep up conversation. The sooner he left, the better. She turned her back on him, stroking Cookie behind the ears as she stepped away, and hoping he would respect her privacy and go. Instead, she heard him yell, "Tank!" and didn't have time to react as the disobedient fluffy monster charged in front of her trying to get to Cookie, his lead tangling around Hannah's legs. It all happened at once, Liam trying to control his dog while Hannah did her best to keep Cookie away from Tank. The lead tightened further, and the next thing she knew she had lost her balance, Cookie scrambling out of her arms as she fell, and she was flat on her back in the sand. For the briefest moment, there was silence. Then she was aware of the dogs barking, and Liam was crouching down beside her, a hand on her shoulder. "Shit! Are you okay?" Anger and embarrassment heated her cheeks as she tried to sit up, shaking him away. "I'm fine. Get off me." "Are you sure? You hit the ground pretty hard." "We're on sand." Sand or no sand, he was right, and she was pretty sure she was going to have a lovely bruise on her bum later. She tried to get up, mildly panicked when her left leg didn't cooperate. Seeing her struggling, Liam offered his hand. She ignored it at first, determined to refuse any help. He had done more than enough. The sharp stabbing pain in her ankle had her stumbling, though, as soon as she put weight on it, and without thinking, she grabbed onto his arm to stop herself from falling. Damn it! She must have twisted it or something. This was not good. "You need to get that checked out. I can take you to the hospital." "No!" There was no way in hell she was getting in a car with Liam Quinn. "Home, then?" "I'm fine," she muttered through gritted teeth, tentatively letting go of him and testing her balance. Standing was one thing. Her ankle hurt like a bitch. But as long as she kept the bulk of her weight on her right foot, it was bearable. Walking was going to hurt like hell, though. "Look, just stop being stubborn and let me help you, okay? I feel kind of responsible." "Kind of?" Hannah stared at him. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't been stalking me..." Her comment was met with a derisive snort of laughter. I wasn't stalking you. You were following me after I asked you to leave me alone. Look, we can argue about this all day, but while we do, the dogs are going to get bored and— Tank! Jesus, Tank! Leave her alone! In the panic after her fall, Hannah hadn't realised that Liam had let go of his dog's lead, and she looked around in alarm to see the giant beast sniffing after Cookie again. The little dog didn't seem too stressed by it, having assessed and dismissed him as a threat. They're okay, he's not bothering her. It did highlight the problem of how she was going to get the dogs home. She was responsible for her charges, and while she might be able to limp back to her flat alone, she would struggle to do it with the three of them on leads. She couldn't leave them here. Rosie was still in the flat. Hannah had left her asleep on the sofa. Would she answer her phone? So, what do you want to do? Tempting as you're making it to leave you here, I won't. Liam chanced a smile and Hannah scowled at him. They weren't friends, and she refused to play nice with him. It's fine. You can go. I'll call my friend. She reached into her pocket for her phone and dialed Rosie's number, annoyed when there was no answer, and irritated that Liam was lingering instead of leaving as instructed. And damn it! If Rosie didn't pick up, Hannah didn't see that she had a choice. She was going to have to accept his offer of help. Look, I get it, okay? You don't like me, you don't want to be interviewed by me, but I don't see how you're safely going to get 3 dogs home unless you let me help you. When she stared at him but didn't argue, he continued. How about a compromise? I'll get you home, and I promise I won't mention a word about my book or what happened back then. She was silent for a moment as she digested that. And what is the compromise? I'm writing this story, Hannah, with or without your help, and I'm sorry you don't like that. Of course she didn't like it. And she knew the others in the Hixton Five would feel the same. Lauren, Jill and Tash had all moved on with their lives. But Hannah knew they were guarded about their past, and Rosie would never cope with having everything dug up. As for poor Miles, he wasn't even here to defend himself. It's not okay, you know. Using what happened to us to try to make money for yourself. She swore she saw a flash of temper in his blue eyes at her accusation, but his tone when he spoke was even. Is that what I'm doing? You know it is. Look, all I ask is that you take my card and you consider talking to me. You don't have to, but I'm staying locally for the next couple of weeks, so please at least think about it. He raised his eyebrows slightly in question as Hannah pretended to ponder his offer. Of course she wasn't going to talk to him, and she didn't plan on giving him any consideration at all. The card he gave her would go straight in the bin. But she was going to need his help getting Rufus, Cookie and Spot to their homes, then back to her flat, so she supposed she should at least pretend to go along with his proposal. So, if I think about it, you promise you'll leave me alone? I promise. And my friend Rosie, you won't bother her, either. It was Liam's turn to hesitate, and she could tell from the slight twitch as his cheek dimpled that he didn't like the extra clause. It was worse for her. Please, leave her alone. If he already knew that, and she guessed he did, he didn't say. "Okay," he agreed eventually. "So, do we have a deal?" Hannah was going to break that deal, and she couldn't help but suspect Liam might go back on his word too. But for the next half an hour, or however long it took them to get back into town, drop the dogs off, then back to her flat, they had an uneasy alliance. She nodded. "We have a deal." Chapter 6. Rosie hadn't long been awake, and, spotting she had a missed call from Hannah, had immediately phoned her back, worried when it went to voicemail. Hannah would be out with the dogs, so why was she not picking up? Had something happened? She had been glancing out of the window, anxiety twisting her gut and wondering what to do, when she spotted the two figures with the big dog heading down the street. Relief skittered through her as she spotted her friend, but it quickly turned to anger when she realised who Hannah was with. Flinging on a hoodie Rosie found in the wardrobe, and still wearing checked pyjama bottoms, she charged out of the flat and down the stairs, just as Hannah and the man who had his arm around her arrived at the main entrance of the building. She had recognised his rangy build, tawny-coloured hair and dark bomber jacket, and her heart was racing. Liam Quinn, the man who had given her a restless night's sleep.
"What the hell are you doing with him?"
Rosie was aware her voice was raised, but she couldn't help it. "I was walking the dogs and—"
"You don't walk that dog," she snapped. "And not with him."
She pointed a finger at Quinn.
"I had a missed call and I've been trying to get hold of you. I was worried."
"I'm sorry," Hannah sounded apologetic. "I had the dogs and couldn't answer.
Why are you walking funny?"
Rosie demanded, finally noticing Hannah was limping.
"Have you hurt her?"
Her second question was aimed at Quinn, who seemed more amused than concerned, which just added to her fury. "Of course not. Well, not intentionally." As Rosie's cheeks heated with rage, Hannah tried to placate her. "I fell over and I've hurt my ankle. I think I've probably twisted it. Liam happened to be down on the beach with his dog. He helped me get home."
"Liam? You're on first-name terms with him?"
"Do you need a hand getting upstairs?" Quinn offered, ignoring Rosie. "I can manage, but thank you." As Hannah turned to go, he stopped her. "Wait, my card." Okay." She avoided Rosie's pointed look as she took the card, quickly pocketing it.
"Hannah! What the hell?"
"It's not what it looks like," Hannah assured her, as they left Quinn on the pavement and walked into her building.
"You just took his card."
Rosie dropped her arm, taking a step back.
"Please tell me you're not considering talking to him."
"Of course I'm not. Look, can you help me get upstairs, please? My ankle is killing me. I need to get some ice on it. Let me sit down, and I promise I will tell you everything." Chapter 7. Hannah Fremont and Rosie Emerson. I wasn't sure how I would react, seeing them again after all of this time. They are no longer children, but they are still recognizable. Blonde Hannah and dark-haired Rosie, one much taller than the other, their mannerisms still the same. Rosie has lost her spark, but I can see she is trying so desperately hard to pretend she still has it. She is, and always was, the more animated of the two. Hannah is calmer, more reserved, but there is an edge to her that didn't exist before. And, of course, she is no longer Fremont, having taken and kept her ex-husband's name. Hannah Cole. I had wondered briefly if it was because she was trying to escape her past, to shed her skin, but that didn't explain her actions now. I watched her and Rosie walk into the building, and I don't have to be a genius to know they will be upstairs right now talking about me. Talking and plotting their next move, which makes me sick to my stomach, realizing that even after all this time they can't just move on. Haven't they already done enough damage, destroyed enough lives? Anger heats the blood coursing through my veins. Both of them have caused so much trouble, though Hannah is the one I still mostly hold responsible. She ignored our threats, and by doing so, she ruined our games. She is the one I want to even the score with most. Now I've seen firsthand what a scheming bitch she is, and realise that she won't let things drop. I am going to make her pay. It is time that someone holds these women accountable for their actions, shows them the consequences of what they have done, and I look forward to teaching them a lesson. Chapter 8. The plan had been for Tank to charm Hannah Cole, not literally knock her off her feet. But while the move hadn't been ideal and Liam still felt shitty about it, at least it had given him a little time to work on her. He had kept to his promise, not mentioning Mrs. W. or the book he was researching on the walk back to her flat, though that had as much to do with concentrating on walking 4 dogs and trying to support Hannah so she didn't fall again, as it did with gaining her trust. She had taken his card, the one he had written the address where he was staying on the back of, though he suspected it might end up in the bin, but she had also agreed to at least consider talking to him. He didn't know if she would get in touch, but at least it was a start. She had been cool